This move immediately fights for central space and opens diagonals for the queen and bishop, setting the stage for many popular and aggressive opening systems. This move directly challenges white's central pawn, aiming to establish an equal footing in the opening and preparing for typical pawn breaks like d6 or nc6. This move develops a knight towards the center, attacking black's e5 pawn, and preparing for kingside castling, a fundamental principle in opening play. This move, nc6, is a foundational developing move that defends the e5 pawn, prepares for further piece development, and contests the central squares, leading into several major opening systems like the Ruy-Lopez or the Italian game. This move initiates the Ruy-Lopez opening, a fundamental and strategically rich defense aiming to pressure black's central pawn and control key squares on the queenside. This move initiates the Morphy defense within the Ruy-Lopez, forcing white's bishop to decide whether to retreat or capture the knight, directly influencing the central pawn structure and piece development for both sides. This move maintains pressure on black's knight and continues the development established in the Ruy-Lopez opening, aiming to control the center and prepare for further piece activity. This move, nf6, is a direct and common challenge to white's Ruy-Lopez setup, initiating a central counterattack and developing a piece towards the king's side. Castling kingside safely secures the monarch and prepares to connect the rooks, a fundamental strategic goal in the opening. This move, nxe4, deviates from main lines of the Ruy-Lopez and gambits a pawn for rapid development and potential counterplay. This move, 6, d4, challenges black's central pawn and aims to open lines for white's pieces, potentially leading to a sharp tactical battle in the Ruy-Lopez. This move forces white's bishop to retreat, gaining valuable tempo for black while expanding on the queenside. This retreat maintains pressure on the center and prepares to recapture the pawn on e4 if black tries to consolidate their central advantage. This move solidifies black's central pawn presence and challenges white's bishop, aiming to gain space and develop actively in this variation of the Ruy-Lopez. This move, dxe5, resolves the tension created by black's knight capture and aims to simplify the position, opening up the d-file for white's rook and potentially creating a central pawn majority. This developing move prepares to challenge white's central pawn structure and offers a pawn recapture, a common theme in this Ruy-Lopez variation. This move develops the queen to support the pawn on e5 and prepare for potential central action or a rook lift to the kingside. This move develops the bishop, preparing to castle and connect the rooks, while also defending the e5 pawn, which is currently under pressure from white's queen and knight. The move Road 1 prepares to redeploy the rook to a more active file, likely the d-file, which is currently semi-open, and supports potential central pawn advances. This move safely tucks the king away, consolidating development and preparing to challenge white's central control while also freeing the f8 rook. This move aims to disrupt black's pawn chain and open lines for white's pieces, creating dynamic play and attacking chances in the center. This move captures a central pawn, opening the b-file and immediately challenging white's central control and piece activity. This recapture on c4 regains material, strengthens white's central pawn presence, and opens the b1h7 diagonal for the queen, preparing to contest the open c-file. Black repositions the bishop to an active diagonal, simultaneously defending the e5 pawn and creating pressure along the a7-1 diagonal, which may influence white's king safety later. This move repositions the bishop to a more active diagonal, offering better support for central pawns and preparing to contest the d5 pawn. This exchange simplifies the position by removing black's key piece controlling the d5 pawn and frees white's rook on d1, opening lines for attack. This recapture on e3 develops the queen to an active square, supporting the c4 pawn and preparing to challenge black's control of the d5 pawn. This move prepares to activate the queen and contest the d-file, potentially preparing for na5 to challenge white's bishop. This move, repositioning the bishop to b3, aims to improve its scope along the long diagonal and prepare for potential attacks on the kingside, while also defending the e4 pawn. This move aims to challenge white's bishop on b3 and potentially gain queenside space, although it allows white to capture the knight on a5 with the bishop, creating an open diagonal for white's queen. This move prepares to reroute the knight to a more active central square, likely f1 and then g3, to contest control of the kingside and support a potential kingside attack. This move repositions the queen to a more active square, potentially supporting a d5 pawn push or preparing to contest the a-file, while also safeguarding against the white knight's potential sortie to c5. This move initiates a strong knight outpost on d4, aiming to control the central squares and potentially pressure black's queenside. This exchange of knights initiates a critical structural transformation, aiming to simplify the position and potentially create an isolated d-pawn for white if the subsequent recapture is not handled with care. White recaptures the pawn, centralizing the queen and preparing to challenge black's fianchettoed bishop and pressure the queenside. This move repositions the queen to a more active square, eyeing the weak b2 pawn and preparing to potentially contest the d-file or support a queenside initiative. White repositions the bishop to the c2 square to protect the d4 pawn and potentially prepare for future central pawn advances, while also maintaining pressure on the queenside. This move challenges white's centralized pawn and opens a diagonal for black's light-squared bishop, aiming to disrupt white's strong central presence. This move repositions the knight to a central square, creating attacking chances and potentially threatening the opponent's queenside pawn structure by targeting squares like c7. This capture on f5 is an important decision, disrupting white's active knight and opening the g-file for potential future rook activity, though it does give up a valuable bishop pair. This move recaptures a piece and consolidates white's central control, aiming to exploit black's slightly weakened pawn structure on the kingside. This move initiates development to an open file, aiming to contest control and potentially exploit the weakened c-file diagonal for white's king. This move prepares to challenge black's advanced queenside pawn structure and potentially create a passed pawn on the c-file by opening up the b-file for potential rook activity. This move challenges white's central pawn structure and aims to activate the rook on the open e-file, preparing for potential pawn pushes or piece exchanges. This move centers the rook on the e-file, reinforcing the pawn on e5 and preparing for potential pawn pushes or exchanges that would open lines for white's heavy pieces. This pawn thrust aims to disrupt white's coordinated pieces and potentially open lines for black's rook by challenging the c4 square and threatening to create a passed pawn. This move initiates an aggressive kingside attack by placing the queen on a strong diagonal, directly threatening the g7 pawn and preparing to exploit the open g-file if black cannot adequately defend. The move 24, qc7, aims to reinforce the pawn chain and prepare for potential counterplay along the c-file, while also connecting the rooks for future action. This move exploits black's weakened light-squared diagonal, aiming to create a passed pawn or disrupt black's coordination. This pawn sacrifice is a desperate attempt to disrupt white's central control and open lines for counterplay, sacrificing material to create complications. White seeks to activate the queen on the kingside and prepare for further kingside pawn advances or attacks. This move weakens your kingside pawn structure, creating potential targets for white's attack. This move aims to penetrate black's kingside, creating a powerful passed pawn that will demand constant attention and potentially lead to a decisive attack. The move *Rode 6 ** sacrifices the rook to disrupt white's pawn chain and open lines for black's queen, and bishop to create counterplay against white's king. This move seeks to reposition the queen to a more active square on the kingside, potentially supporting an attack on black's weakened kingside pawn structure after the pawn sacrifice on c4. This move initiates a critical pawn exchange that will reshape the central pawn structure, potentially opening lines for white's rook on the e-file and creating long-term positional consequences for black's kingside defense. This capture exploits black's weakened kingside and the undefended g6 pawn, opening lines for white's attack. Accepting the material sacrifice by taking the bishop opens the h-file, creating a direct attacking avenue towards black's king. This move initiates a decisive king hunt, forcing black's king into a vulnerable central position and exploiting the exposed dark squares. With a powerful queen sacrifice for checkmate, the king's desperate flight to f8 opens a critical diagonal for white's queen, allowing it to continue its powerful attack and potentially hunt down the black king. This move initiates a decisive mating attack by forcing the black king into a vulnerable position on the kingside, leveraging the exposed state of the black monarch after its recent escape from the central square. This move is a critical defensive maneuver, aiming to reposition the rook to a more active file and provide potential support for the king's defense against white's aggressive queen and bishop attack. This move seeks to reroute the rook to the h-file, aiming to support the advancing king and potentially create new attacking avenues while reinforcing the d3 square. This move opens a crucial diagonal for the black queen and prepares to challenge white's control of the central files. This move forces the black king to a more exposed square, opening lines for white's attack and leveraging the open files created by recent pawn exchanges. This move is a desperate attempt to block the crucial h-file discovered attack and prevents immediate checkmate, though it does little to alleviate white's overwhelming initiative. This move, k5, is a strong tactical response, exploiting black's discovered attack and creating immediate threats to black's king by consolidating white's attacking pieces. This move prepares to challenge white's powerful rook on the e-file, aiming to neutralize the direct attack on black's king and potentially regain central control. White's king is currently exposed, and rf3 aims to bolster the defense by potentially activating the rook on the f-file for counterplay or defending the critical 7th rank. This move is a strategic blunder as it moves the queen into a precarious position, allowing white to win material with the subsequent k5. This decisive sacrifice exploits the king's exposed position after black's misplaced queen, opening lines for a swift mating attack. 36. k7. This move is forced as the king must escape the discovered check from the rook and bishop, prioritizing king's safety above all else in this sharp tactical situation. This move redirects the queen to a more active square, preparing to support a potential kingside attack and simultaneously defending against black's passed pawn. This move attempts to regain some central influence and potentially pressure white's queen and rook but it overlooks the immediate tactical threat to Black's king after White's strong sacrifice. This capture opens the b-file, challenging Black's queen and preparing to exploit the weakened pawn structure on the queenside. This move sacrifices material to open the d-file for White's queen and rook, aiming to exploit the exposed Black king. This move activates the rook on the b-file, aiming to challenge Black's control and potentially support a queenside pawn advance or pressure Black's potentially exposed king. The rook now occupies an active open file, aiming to pressure Black's potentially vulnerable king and support potential pawn advances or piece sacrifices on the queenside. The move 40. Rc1 is a strong positional move, centralizing the rook and preparing to contest the open c-file, potentially creating pressure against Black's pawn chain and supporting White's own king's safety. This move activates the knight, preparing to challenge White's central pawn majority and control important central squares, potentially leading to exchanges that simplify the position to Black's advantage. This move aims to exploit the open nature of the center and Black's somewhat uncoordinated pieces by attacking the weak pawn on c4, potentially forcing further concessions or creating tactical opportunities.